Hello everyone, and welcome once again to Caleb Likes Books. Today I'm bringing you another Star Wars book review from Star Wars Legends, and that is going to be for The Courtship of Princess Leia. So The Courtship of Princess Leia was one of the early EU novels written by Dave Wolverton, who also went by the name David Farland. It was one of the early EU novels, and it's one that I wasn't really planning to read right now. But I've been working my way slowly through the New Jedi Order, and I plan to pick up the pace on that this year. But one of the books that I read recently from that series mentioned some things that I had assumed at the time were from this book, because of just what little I knew about it and kind of the way that things were said. And so I figured I would read it because just in case there are like more things that might get referenced that I might want to catch. Kind of the similar thing with Truce at Bakura, which is the book that I read and reviewed for the last video on my channel. And so I read both of those kind of because I want to catch certain references in the New Jedi Order, because I've been told by some people that that's a thing. So I decided to move this one up and read it now. So getting into the review, first talk about some positives for this book. So the big thing for me is I really enjoyed the world building in this book, which is something that when it comes to Star Wars books doesn't actually happen terribly often. Occasionally there are some books where I think the world building is done really well. Things like the Darth Bane trilogy, kind of the world building related to the Sith and their culture and the way that they operate. Things like that. The High Republic series, for how it kind of talks about, the state of the galaxy and how the Jedi are like and how the Republic's like and all that stuff, and like the different villains and things. So with Courtship of Princess Leia, the world building is something that, again, stood out to me, which, for the most part, the world building in Star Wars books doesn't stand out to me too much, because aside from occasionally introducing like a new alien race or going to a new planet or something like that, which in most cases to me is not terribly interesting unless you have something like the Yuzan Vong or some planet that's like very unique or something like that. Usually the world building doesn't stand out much, but it did in this book. In this book, the OT characters, Luke, Leia, Han, and so forth, and some other characters from this book go to Dathomir. Essentially, the premise of this book is Leia is there's this other planet that is wanting her to kind of marry into the royal family type of thing. And so the guy that she is maybe going to marry is like trying to be courting her and stuff, Courtship of Princess Leia. So then she is like split between like him and Han, because she also fell in love with Han over the course of the original trilogy. As a result of this, Han gets very upset that she is actually considering this other guy whose name I can't remember. I don't have the book with me at the moment, so I can't reference it, but he's getting very upset, and so he essentially kidnaps her and brings her to Dathomir because he won it in a Sabbat contest. He just won the planet, apparently. And so he brings her there, and then we get to see Dathomir. So that's kind of the premise of this book. And the planet of Dathomir I found very interesting, and it's a planet that shows up in like the Clone Wars and stuff, which I have seen a little bit of Dathomir in the Clone Wars, but not very much, because I still haven't finished Clone Wars. But from what I've heard, it's a little different in this book, but it was very interesting to learn about. It's a very unique culture. The people who live on Dathomir have a very unique culture from other people in Star Wars that I have read or seen before. So that was really interesting, and Dathomir in general was just a really interesting place to explore some interesting cultural stuff. Learning about the Night Sisters and the other group, the group that the characters are more allied with, whose name I can't remember the name of the group, but kind of the witches of Dathomir and like their all their groups and things. were interesting to learn about. I also really actually enjoyed the setup to this book quite a bit. Like the first 20%, 25% of this book, basically everything up until they got to Dathomir, I actually really liked. Not that I didn't like the rest of it, because there certainly was some good stuff later in the book, but I was really surprised how much I enjoyed the beginning of this book. Because going in, I wasn't that excited for it. I had heard from a couple of people that it was good, but most of what I've heard about this book has been mixed to negative. So I was not terribly excited for it, but I actually really enjoyed kind of the setup, learning about these other people who want Leia to marry one of their people, and all this stuff, learning about them and the interactions between the characters. And all that kind of stuff. I actually really enjoyed the setup kind of for this book, and I thought it was really interesting. And I also did enjoy some of the original trilogy characters, which I'll get to a little more when I talk about negatives. But Han Solo, generally, I thought was really good. I enjoyed him. Luke, generally, also I enjoyed. 3PO was a huge standout for me in this book. I always enjoy 3PO. I know some people think he's a little annoying, but I love 3PO. 3PO is basically me if I were in the Star Wars universe. There's a lot of similarity there, aside from the fact that I'm not a robot, I think. So I really enjoyed 3PO in this book. He had a lot of really funny lines, and he was, for me, out of the whole of the original trilogy characters, he was actually the standout, which doesn't happen very often. Usually when it comes to, other Star Wars books or even the films, it's usually Luke or Han or Leia or, even Lando on some occasions, who have really stuck out to me. And really, 3PO and R2 don't really stand out to me that often as being real highlights. But in this book, 3PO definitely was. Unfortunately, that's all I got for positives. So now we're going to talk about some negatives. So first off, the general kind of storyline and the plot. I didn't dislike it, but I didn't really love it either. I didn't find it terribly compelling, which for me, that's not really a huge negative because it was still, an okay plot. I still, generally liked reading it, but it was, it wasn't like I loved the plot or anything. It wasn't really a strong plot in my opinion. And also the big issue for me that I took with this book, aside from that, is the characterization of certain characters. I talked a minute ago about how I really loved some of the original trilogy characters. So first of all, you have Han Solo, who I did say mostly I enjoyed, and I did. But the kind of thing that initiates the big events of this book, which I already mentioned, and it's on the back of the book, so it's not really a spoiler. But Han gets upset that Leia is okay with potentially being with this other guy, so he literally kidnaps her and takes her to a completely different planet. And to me, that felt way out of character for Han Solo, to the point where it really took me out of the book. I am not typically one to complain a huge amount for characters not acting entirely like themselves, because generally I'm willing to excuse some things here and there that don't quite fit if everything else, kind of works together. But that particular thing really irritated me, and I just did not think that it fit Han's character whatsoever. And to be honest, I almost just put the book down right there, because I was like, no, this, regardless of what I think of the rest of the book, this one thing just it doesn't seem like something that would happen, at least in my mind. So the rest of it was just kind of the rest of it was decent, but the thing that kind of started it just really threw me off. And the main complaint I have as far as characterization is for Leia. I really did not like Leia in this book. And again, typically I'm not one to complain about really disliking a particular character, because most of the time, if I don't really like a character, I'm not typically super disliking them either. I just am pretty indifferent, or you're supposed to dislike them or something like that. But in this, it just did not feel like Leia to me. Like, I did not buy her, kind of getting with this other guy, Isildur, that's the name of him, because it sounds like Isildur from Lord of the Rings. That's the only reason I really remember his name. Isildur, she was like, yeah, I really like you, I'm kind of thinking about going off and marrying you, which to me just doesn't feel right. And maybe it's because I know that in future books, Leia gets married to Han and they have children and all of this stuff. In addition to the fact that they also were, into each other in the original trilogy. But to me, it just really didn't feel right. I did not think that, like I said, I just didn't buy that happening. I was reading it and I was like, to me, this does not feel like something that Leia at this point in time would do. I mean, yeah, she doesn't, love everything about Han. She's certainly, they still bicker and all that stuff. But, to me, it just didn't seem right that she would just be okay with leaving him behind entirely. And that's the really big thing that irritated me about this book. And that's pretty much all I got to talk about in particular. So overall, this book, kind of similar to Truce at Bakura for me, was just an okay book. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. I certainly hated some aspects of it, as I'm sure you can tell, but I didn't, it wasn't a book that I just entirely disliked, because there was some good stuff. Like I said, I really enjoyed Dathomir, and I liked the setup and all this stuff. There was stuff that I enjoyed in this book, but ultimately I wasn't super into the plot. I really disliked how some characters were handled and that kind of thing, so that kind of throws it off a little bit for me. It was still a decent book. I'm glad to have read it because it certainly expands I keep hitting my ring on this table. It certainly expands the Star Wars universe. With Dathomir and expanding on that culture and all that stuff. So it certainly was worth reading for that. But otherwise, I don't know if I could really recommend it, even though I don't think it's really that bad. It just had those few things that to me just really did not work. So if I were to give this a rating out of 10, I'm thinking probably a 6.5. Which, based on how much I talked about how I hated some of that stuff, might seem a little weird, because that's, in my mind, a 6.5 is still a decent book that is almost on the level of something I would legitimately recommend, but not quite there. And most of the reason for that, like I said, is the characterization of Luke, C-3PO, the Dathomir stuff. There was plenty of good stuff in this book that I did enjoy reading. But the stuff with Leia and the kind of catalyst for the plot really happening and just the plot in general just didn't quite land for me. But it was still a decent book that I think was okay, all things considered. But anyways, that's pretty much it for this review. Let me know down in the comments if you've read this book and if you kind of share any of my thoughts. I know this tends to be a pretty divisive sort of book within the Star Wars community. I've heard a lot of people say it's horrible and they hate it, and I've heard some people say it's good, and I've heard most people say that they just don't care about it, or just don't really like it, but don't hate it, or something like that. So let me know down in the comments what you think. I myself am even a little conflicted on where I'm at with this book, but I gave you my thoughts, so hopefully you found them interesting. And that is pretty much it for this video, so thank you for watching, and I will see you guys next time.